Now let me introduce today's speaker, Nick Schneider. Nick is a lean consultant at heart who's wandered the world learning each step of the way. From his early Lean Six Sigma days, he followed his curiosity in software and IT, eventually launching an IT service management business. Becoming fascinated with XaaS, he built a service catalog practice evolving into a budding cloud business. A few acquisitions later, Nick found his way home to lean, software, and DevOps, where he launched Simplify. Today, Simplify believes in challenging software delivery's convention of conflict, and Simplify believes in safely innovating software with harmony and simplicity. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Karen. Thanks for having me, Lisa. When we talk about, when we talking about streamlining and automating processes, as well as eliminating queues with self-service. So, by design, self-service, it's seemingly simple by design for the user. However, achieving this capability requires abstracting away all of the complexity, which requires a deep understanding, and that's kind of a little bit of a prelude of what we'll be talking about today. So thanks for pulling up this slide, Lisa. So to help facilitate the presentation today, we're going to be using an airline analogy, and we'll be using this to help us illustrate important self-service concepts. And to that very point, we'll be examining kind of a guiding question that'll guide us today. Well, exactly how is software delivery like airline travel? And the prompt there is, well, everyone hates queues and wants to go faster safely. So and don't change a slide yet, Lisa. I'll kind of prompt you when we're ready to change a slide. So with that being said, and to further help, or I guess kind of illuminate these points, I am also going to be sharing an experience, and it's an experience from my past life. And I was working for a solution provider company, and at the time at this company, we were developing a software product, and I was managing a team of deployment engineers. So we're going to use combination of kind of this airline analogy and then my experience from a past life working for this particular company. So if you could go to the next slide, Lisa. All right, so frustration. So first things first, just as in airline travel, and airline travel is definitely known its share of frustration and anger. At times frustration, and at times anger were running high in this organization that I was working in. And it was running high on both sides of the proverbial wall. So I guess let me kind of set the stage in terms of within the organization that I was working with, we were definitely experiencing a number of challenges. Experience has shown that these challenges were not unique to our organization. But combination of a few things. So number one, we had a team of capable hands-on developers, but those developers, they didn't have any safe access to dev environments or to prod or even to be able to kind of stand up dev environments. So they didn't really have those tools to be able to proceed without having to first go through operations and deployment team, my team. The other aspect that we were struggling with is we had fragile and high touch manual processes. And this is something that was definitely proved problematic for us. We also had a queue system. So a queue system, if developers or others wanted to be able to get an environment requests or be able to get log requests, it was kind of a traditional queue system. And as well, we had a lot of work in progress that was built up at the QA bottleneck. And then additionally, we had a very siloed structure. So the deployment and operations engineers, very separated, and definitely experiencing some downstream consequences of some I guess you could say high risk upstream decisions. And then at the time, from a cultural perspective, in the spirit of being innovative and being agile, we unfortunately had kind of developed and settled into a little bit of an anti-change management culture. So that was adding an extra layer of challenge. And then I guess, it's really important to say, right up front, everyone within the organization had good intentions. Everyone had good intentions. No one was malicious. Really, everyone wanted to help the organization achieve success and help our customers. So, all that being said, given some of those challenges, we did have challenge, and you probably won't be too surprised to hear that within my deployment team, I did have a challenge around a high turnover rate. And it was a tough landscape, it was a tough environment, and so we did struggle with a high turnover rate. So if you go to the next slide there, Lisa. Okay, so it was challenging, and we've been navigating this for a while, and really a lot of these things that I described, it all kind of came to a kind of a painful head during a critical customer production deployment. And so as a byproduct of these challenges, one of my deployment engineers, who I'll call Bob, he was painfully struggling to try to deploy and configure this application in the customer's production environment. So he had to reach out for assistance to one of the developers, and the developer, very eager to help and help out, lacking access to get log information. What started out as a very benign log request from the lead developer, it eventually kind of evolved into a WebEx session at Saturday at 1 o'clock in the morning, and from there it kind of deteriorated. And again, it's not like anyone had bad intentions. Everyone was trying to do right by the customer, but eventually it kind of deteriorated, where the developer was initially looking over Bob's virtual shoulder, and then eventually the developer ended up taking control of Bob's system, and he ended up making code changes directly into production. And unfortunately, I was part of this session, and it was it was not a good moment. It was not a good development for us, and and that was kind of the last straw for Bob. And so the next morning, he submitted his resignation. And you can slide to the next slide there, Lisa. And then, finally, after 2 weeks of battling, we basically had to abandon this customer deployment, which confused and concerned the customer, to say the least. And so, I guess we'll just say that, when the flight got canceled, the customer was not happy, not by any stretch. So, right about this time, fortunately, we had brought on a new team member who I'll call Laura. And you can go to the next slide there, Lisa. Lucky for us, Laura just happened to be, she had a great background. She kind of had this background. She was a certified Scrum Master, and then she was also a certified ITIL practitioner. And just, with that fresh perspective and that background and that knowledge set, she was able to really kind of start to bridge the dialogue within the organization. And she helped she helped us analyze and streamline our release management process. And she just had that good perspective of being able to kind of that end-to-end view, but also could really weigh into the details. In parallel, fortunately, she was not the only one who was looking at driving some improvement and evolving our capabilities. So we also had a few engineers, and they were doing some grassroots experimentation around DevOps automation. So that turned out to be a very critical asset for us in terms of work that they were doing. And then if you want to go to the next slide there, Lisa. Plus, we had a cloud architect who I'll call Matt, and Matt was keen on learning and evolving his skill set. And we had some security requirements with unclear ownership, and so it's something that had been slipping through the cracks on us in that last mile, if you will. And so he ramped up to better manage our security certificates, and then in parallel, he was also started to started to learn and ramp up around JavaScript as well. So Matt definitely embraced this notion of continuous learning and continuing to evolve his skill set. So, stepping back, working with this team, Laura was able to drive the process to help streamline our release management process. And then she was able to incorporate the DevOps automation, as well as shifting left on some of the security requirements that are earlier in the software lifecycle. So if you want to go to the next slide, Lisa. So in terms of solution, we had evolved release management, and to a lesser extent change management, and where we released and we were able to publish instance and environment templates options in our native self-service interface, and these could be selected and provisioned by developers. So if you want to go to the next slide, Lisa. So, just to kind of, recap on this experience working with the solution provider organization, in terms of results that came out of this initial process, we weren't perfect, and we definitely did not figure it all out. We were still bound by some architectural limitations, but we made progress. So, sparked by Laura's collaborative approach, we experienced a nascent, bottoms-up cultural transformation, which is oftentimes kind of that fundamental way to start to kind of seed and grow that change within an organization. So it was kind of a cool bottoms-up cultural transformation that she kind of helped to ignite. And then we also had more harmony. We had more harmony, simply measured by less resignations. And as I'd mentioned, over the prior 6 to 12 months, I had a painful all the way around for everyone involved, a high level of resignations. And so measured, when we talk about harmony in terms of less resignations, we had moved the dial in a good direction. Also, a lot less handoff confusion, and we had shorter lead time. So, lead times, when we talk about that, we were able to reduce that, measured in weeks, to getting that down to days. We had greater change frequency. We had frequency and success. And then we were able to, we automated the deployment, from moving away from this fragile high-touch process, and we were able to reduce queues a little bit with some of that native self-service capability. And then, as with all change, some people landed in different seats. So fortunately, in the end, we were able to retain Bob. Took a lot of work, and just it was kind of some unnatural acts, if you will, but we were able to retain Bob. And in the end, he was able to eventually went off to work with our sales team, and in the process had a chance to drive and develop a whole new skill set. So with the passage of time, as far as what we were able to achieve within that organization, it became apparent that our approach wasn't unique, and it was being employed across a broad range of organizations. Likely, many organizations that are represented by today's audience. So evolving forward, if you want to go to the next slide, Lisa. So, today the opportunity is really to continue the evolution of these concepts of streamlining processes, DevOps automation, and continuous learning and operations. So combine and streamline the processes, DevOps automation, and continuous learning and operations, and able to take the opportunity today is to continue their evolution in line with what the industry has seen as kind of like this years-long trend of software eating the world. So if you want to go to the next slide, Lisa. So, for our purposes, this trend it's manifesting itself in the form of two critical drivers that we're seeing in a lot of organizations that we're working with. Number one, more developers within the organization, and not only more developers, but also a broader range of developers. So, kind of started to allude a little bit earlier to at that last organization, Matt kind of continuing to evolve his skill set and learning JavaScript and starting to learn some basic automation and configuration automation type of capabilities. So, more developers, but also a broader range of developers in terms of different range of skill set within those developers. You know, you know, anecdotally, and sometimes it's nice to be able to, and we'll take a look at a couple, you know, industry references, but you know, it's anecdotally, just over the course of the last, I don't know, maybe the last few weeks, in my network, I've kind of crossed paths with 3 folks that I think represent this trend of more developers within organizations, and then just their expanding role. So in one case, I've got a good friend who's a relatively recent graduate of a school back east, a very prestigious school, and he got a theology degree. Well, today he's ramping up as a software developer, and he's ramping up around Python. So it's just kind of interesting to see him make that transition. And then not even a few days later, I was at a local DevOps meetup here in Denver, and ended up connecting with this gal who was formerly an elementary school teacher, and now she's in the process of ramping up as an SRE, as a site reliability engineer. So just interesting, you know, kind of different backgrounds that people are finding their way towards the software development space. And then, you know, the last anecdote that I'll quickly share is I was having a conversation with a good friend last week, and he's a long time, very successful executive within the software industry out of Silicon Valley. And he broke it down to me in just real simple terms. He said, you know, going forward, Nick, we're all going to need to be developers. So I just, you know, when I kind of have different data points like that, more anecdotally, and then this notion of software eating the world. So if you go to the next slide, Lisa. You know, that quote comes from a gentleman by the name of Mark Anderson. And if you're not familiar with him, he's founder of Landscape and renowned venture capitalist. And so he actually said this in a 2011 Wall Street Journal article. And you know, he also went on to say, you know, not only is software eating the world, but in the future, every company will become a software company. So that was back in 2011. And then if you scroll forward to the next slide, Lisa. You know, this is actually a quote that came out of an article from just last month from CNBC, and they kind of went on to say, you know, a majority of companies say lack of access to software developers is a bigger threat to success than the lack of access to capital. So that's a pretty powerful statement. That's a pretty powerful statement, being able to kind of, you know, putting those kind of implications on the table. You know, but as I thought about this, I thought, well, this is just further evidence of software's criticality to companies. And really, it's kind of strategic, you know, it's highlighting I guess you could say the strategic value of in better empowering developers with self-service. So to me, you know, just as we think about where we've come with self-service, and then the criticality of software today, and then the criticality of being able to empower developers with self-service, I think, you know, just a lot of indications are pointing in a similar direction. So if you go to the next slide, Lisa. So as we scroll forward here, let's now kind of go back and revisit this analogy. Let's revisit our airline analogy around how is software delivery like airline travel? Well, everyone hates queues and wants to go faster safely. So now what I want to do is I want to kind of double click into this. I want to double click into this analogy. And so if you want to go to the next slide, Lisa. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this idea. You know, why do we want to modernize processes with self-service access? And then even this idea of, you know, everyone wants to go faster safely. Well, you know, what does that mean, go faster safely? And, you know, more specifically, what does that mean when we say safely? So, you know, when we're talking about safely and going faster safely, we're talking about balancing and resolving this tug of war, if you will, between dev and operations. And, you know, we got a little bit of a taste of that from the initial poll in terms of kind of just the nature of the relationship today between those organizations from those initial poll results. You know, and this is something that the industry has seen for quite some time. I guess, you know, kind of a new variable in this is, in some cases, this tug of war is between dev and ops. In other cases, you know, in some organizations, there's been this creation of maybe like a DevOps team. And so in some cases, you now can find residing between Dev and Ops, you can have this DevOps team. And that being said, sometimes you can have a little bit of a tug of war, a little bit of tension between the DevOps team and the operations and security folks. So we've been evolving with the introduction of DevOps and how to optimize that and how to get the most value out of that. In terms of being able to move faster safely, whether it's Dev or DevOps, some of the dynamics still can be present. And so when we say safely, what we're talking about is meeting security requirements. We're talking about following compliance policies. We're talking about financial stewardship. And so, when we talk about the why and the how of self-service, here we're talking about and how that can help. If we take a little bit of a step back, we're talking about incorporating and invoking security templates within the packaging and within the back-end automation. As well, we're talking about compliance policy automation. So taking these compliance policies that have been drafted and authored and approved, and looking for ways to incorporate that into the back-end orchestration and automation that is present and through whether it's a provisioning process or otherwise. And then it's really about taking each of these and incorporating this idea of whether it's security templates or automated policies, tying those into the self-service capability. So when we talk about why modernize processes with self-service access, we're looking to achieve better balance, and we're looking to achieve better resolution around some of these disconnects and these natural points of tension, where on the development side there's a desire for speed and change and velocity, and then on the infrastructure and operation side, on the ops side, there's understandably a need and requirement for control and compliance and governance and security. So there's opportunity in helping to kind of resolve that tug of war with self-service access that, for lack of a more technical way to say it, kind of bakes in some of those templates and bakes in some of those compliance policies within that self-service experience. So, with that introduction of why modernize processes with self-service, let's elaborate on what we mean when we say self-service, and more specifically what we call modern self-service. So if you go to the next slide, Lisa. All right, so I want to pause here and provide kind of viewer warning. So viewer warning. In this moment, when Karen introduced myself and my company earlier, she said one of the things that we do is kind of challenge some of the conventions around the conflict around the software innovation and software delivery. And so, with this notion of modern self-service access, we are challenging, we're challenging, I guess you could say, conventional thinking and perspectives of self-service. And so we took an innovative approach. And we took this innovative approach with the goal of safely empowering any type of developer at any phase in the software lifecycle. So again, we took this innovative approach with the goal of safely empowering any type of developer at any phase in the software lifecycle. So with that, we shifted some key service management processes to the left, and we roughly align them with the software lifecycle as depicted here. So you can see on the far left there this notion of change management, and we're kind of aligning that with the front end of the software lifecycle. Similarly, kind of problem management and this idea of feedback. It's in that middle portion, kind of introducing that in terms of the self-service experience in the middle of the software life cycle, and then introducing this idea of visibility at the tail end of the life cycle. And let me give you a few examples of what we're talking about here, and we'll delve into these examples a little bit more in just a few slides. But when we talk about autonomy and change management on the front end of the software lifecycle, we're talking about making changes and provision and modifying. So this might be the ability to self-provision development environments, or it might be the ability to do automated environments with custom Git branches and versions. So just on that front end, we're talking about being able to provision and modify. And then as we proceed from left to right, when we talk about feedback and feedback loops, really kind of targeting root cause, it's the ability to do things like maybe access real-time log streams for applications and the operating systems, and do this to help in troubleshooting and root cause analysis. Or maybe it's the ability to perform log analytics to help identify broken business workflows in loosely coupled systems. And then just a quick example on visibility. This might be the ability to maybe perform log analytics to better understand solution behavior in performance. It might be to gain observability of complex systems in production, utilizing logging and metrics and distributed tracing. So just some quick examples of what we talk about when we say autonomy and feedback and visibility, really spanning the whole software lifecycle. So, with that, this is kind of challenging, I guess you could say, challenging the convention of self-service, and it's kind of challenging us to take some of these key service management processes that have served us well over the years, and to be able to start to shift those left earlier in that software life cycle. And as we proceed, we're asking you, through this session and through this discussion, we're asking you to kind of join us in this innovation, and we're asking you to join us kind of in this leap of perspective, if you will. The good news is we're not without a frame of reference, and so hence the airline analogy. So in fact, we'll be leaning on the airline analogy in the next few slides as we explore this paradigm shift a little bit more. So, I previously mentioned safely empowering any type of developer. And so, with this Forrester image that you're seeing on the slide here, we're introducing, we're going to come back and we're going to delve into these more, but we're introducing two concepts. There's different types of developers, and there's different levels of abstraction. And so, we'll weigh into these more in the coming slides. But for now, on the right-hand side, you can see that there's this notion of, well, there's rapid developers and there's coders and there's DevOps and IT Ops pros. So not all developers are created equal. And it's more than just what languages or what frameworks. It's really kind of getting at this idea we'll introduce on the left called this level of abstraction. And so when we talk about the level of abstraction, it's a little bit of guidance there where kind of a low abstraction enables very granular control for developers, and then a high level abstraction entails fewer decisions that would have to be made by that developer. With that, let's do this. We'll come back to this and we'll kind of weigh into this more, but now, what we did on this slide was we wanted to start to kind of marry these ideas, and we wanted to start marrying the idea of modern self-service, which you see across the top, autonomy and feedback and visibility. And then additionally, we're starting to kind of also layer in the different types of developers on the left. So this is a step in the process of kind of starting to marry these concepts of oh, you have different kinds of developers, and then their needs would be different based upon whether they needed autonomy or access around feedback or visibility. But we'll come back to this and we'll kind of wade into a little bit more detail. But if you go to the next slide, Lisa, now as we're trying to better understand these implications of abstraction and developer types, let's go back and revisit our airline travel analogy. So, just a couple comments on abstraction. That might be a term that's familiar and for folks, and maybe less familiar for others. So when we're talking about abstraction, we're talking about this idea of you're standardizing. You're standardizing, or it's pre-validated, or it's almost kind of like guardrails. So, as you can see here, it's at a high level of abstraction, we're talking about fewer decisions that have to be made. Whereas in the case of a lower level of abstraction, that's kind of granular control, so there's the opportunity to make more decisions. The other thing that I want to comment when we talk about this idea of abstraction is it's really important to note that in terms of the preferred level of abstraction, that's really could be that could be a product of different things. It could be a product of knowledge. Well, someone has the knowledge to make those granular decisions, or they don't. But at the same time, it could also be a matter of time. They have the time to make these decisions, or no, they want more standardized, more prepackaged options. And then it could be interest. So let's talk about this within the context of our airline travel analogy. So similar to the three types of developers, we've kind of showcased, if you will, three different types of travelers. So we've got in the lower left-hand corner, we've got the road warrior, and this, the road warrior is that type of traveler who's travels a lot during the week and probably heading out on a Monday morning, coming back on a Thursday, or in some cases maybe it's a day trip to Chicago, whatever the case may be in terms of that road warrior. And then at the other extreme, at the top, we talk about this idea of kind of a tour traveler, whereas this is a traveler who's more keen on being able to have the experience of the tour and be able to kind of make less selections, make less choices. And it might just simply be a matter of, well, do I want to go to Italy, or do I want to go to France, or do I want to go to England? And then the international traveler is kind of like in between, so we'll talk about that one. So let's elaborate on this notion of the road warrior and this idea of granular control. And again, the purpose of why we're going down this path with the airline analogy is to take a concept that can sometimes be a little bit complex and a little bit less intuitive, I guess you could say, as we're starting to look for ways to better align with our developers and understand there's different types of developers and they have different needs. So within this analogy, when we talk about the road warrior, well, they're the ones that want that granular control. They're the ones that want to be able to go into that mobile app. And I'll just speak for myself as a quick example. My example is, I guess you could say I've worn all three of these different hats over time. But one that I'm very familiar with is that of the road warrior. And so I was sharing with someone recently that, if I'm booking a flight and I'm going from here to Seattle, and, I kind of pay attention to, okay, what time of the day is it? And what side of the plane am I going to be sitting on? Because, I don't want to be in that seat where the person in front of me has their window shade open, and the sun is just pouring through and just hitting me in my seat. So I go to that level of granular thinking, and I want that level of granular control to be able to pick the seat that I know I won't necessarily be, having the sun hit me in the face. And then I was talking to someone else, and she was talking about how, what she likes to do is she likes to go out to Seat Guru, a completely separate website. She wants to go out to Seat Guru and find that airplane model and understand, hey, what's the best seat that I could choose with the most leg room, the most just kind of general space without having to pay a premium for that particular seat. So these are definitely examples of road warriors that are looking to get just real granular control of the exact process around the seat. Whereas if we abstract back to the tour traveler, well, the tour traveler, they're not going to be necessarily making those choices. They won't make a choice around the airline. They won't make a choice around the departure date and the return date. All those choices have been abstracted away. Those have all been simplified. Those all have been removed for the purpose of the traveler, because there's fewer decisions to make. It's like, hey, I kind of say, where do I want to go and when do I want to go there? And so this idea, so this is an example, this is a non-technical example of this idea of abstraction, where the road warrior's got more control and the tour traveler has fewer decisions that they have to make. And then the international traveler in between, maybe they'll go in and they might say, well, I want to fly on this day and on this time within the self-service application, but they might not be able to make their own seat selection. They might be traveling on different airlines internationally. So while through a self-service application, they can create their itinerary, they might not be able to get seats. It's kind of an example of kind of that middle level of abstraction. So with that, let's kind of continue to kind of build this out. So let's jump over this slide right here, and let's just kind of go to the next slide. And so what we're talking about here, we're talking about safely empowering developers with self-service. So let's spend a little bit more time on this table than we did initially. So similar, instead of having the various travelers on the left, we've got different developer types. And so, as mentioned, these DevOps and ITOps pros that are kind of ramping up on development skills, these are the kind of folks that they're really comfortable. They're comfortable with the infrastructure configuration, and not only are they comfortable, for their needs, they need to have greater access to make decisions around OS, or to make decisions around configuring CPU or RAM or storage. And in these type of developers, self-service experience, they need to have the ability to make more granular control, kind of like the travelers. The traveler says, well, I want to understand in more specific terms, which specific flight and which specific seat, and I want to be able to have that visibility. That's what developers, the DevOps types are like, kind of on that bottom side. And then when we talk about rapid developers, rapid developers that were captured within that Forrester image, these are the kind of folks that a lot of that detail is abstracted away. They're not making decisions around infrastructure services. They're not making decisions around platform services. They're just making decisions around application services and maybe a framework. And that's the extent of the decisions and the choices that would need to be made available to rapid developers on that high end. And then this idea of coders, they're kind of had the mantra, let coders code. So kind of in the middle there, these are the kind of folks that they're kind of like that international traveler. They have a need to control some parts of the process, but not all. And so while the infrastructure decisions are less relevant for them, some of the middleware decisions and some of the platform decisions, whether it's monitoring or logging as examples, or load balancing, those are the kind of capabilities that a coder is going to want. And they're going to want to have those options within self-service. So let's go back to some of the earlier examples just to put as much context around this as we can, because we recognize that in this process, we are kind of challenging conventions, and we recognize that. We recognize that there's a need to take these service management processes and to shift them left early in the software lifecycle. And we recognize that in some cases, it happens in a decentralized fashion. In some cases, it happens in an automated fashion. And in some cases, the best way to think about these processes, when we think about these key service management processes, it's like, well, why you do change management and what you do is the same. However, that being said, who does it and how they do it and when they do it, those are the elements that change. So whether it's change management, problem management, incident events, the what and why you do those has not changed. What has drastically changed is this notion of who does it, when it's done, and how it's achieved. And more, some of these activities that we're showcasing here are the activities that will be achieved through a self-service capability. So, so when we go back to our examples and we talk about this idea of autonomy, well, hey, I want to be able to have a self-service artifact for deployment in loosely coupled systems where we need access to other components for development. That's a valid request. When we talk about feedback loops, there could be the need, hey, we want to be, in terms of getting feedback to the QA folks, we want the ability to provision maybe an end-to-end environment to do integration validation. And then, the visibility on the back end, we provided some examples earlier. One of those might be, as mentioned earlier, we want the ability to perform, log analytics to understand the solution behavior and performance. It could be within kind of that production environment. We want the ability to provision an end-to-end environment to reproduce issues, or maybe validate data scripts, as well as to be able to get a scalable setup and observe what behavior for my particular application services would be like within a production-like environment. So, with that, there's a couple different things going on here, which is why we wanted to put this in kind of a table form, and we wanted to create the opportunity to talk through the various examples. So I'm going to kind of generally transition us forward here, and I want to make sure that we kind of have a chance to really get through the critical points. So I'm amazed how fast the time has gone by on the call here, but I did want to take just a moment or two and kind of summarize. We started off talking about a prior experience that really just provided this initial understanding of what here's the opportunity around self-service. And then when we came forward to today, we talked about this idea of software eating the world, and we talked about how there's really been this rapid expansion, of software and expansion of developers, and also their strategic value to their companies. So more so than ever before, it's critically important for us to be able to have a good organizational appreciation of software, and then in support of the organization and our customers to be able to do everything we can to safely empower those developers. Which then kind of brings us to the other item that we touched on. We talked about the self-service benefits of empowering developers to go faster safely. So we talked about that in terms of security considerations. We talked about that in terms of governance and compliance considerations. And then we also just briefly touched on that in terms of financial stewardship. And then in the lower left, we introduced kind of this, it's an innovative new way, if you will, of thinking about self-service. And I guess, we kind of use the term modern self-service, and taking that self-service capability and ensuring that it spans the full software lifecycle. And then we've got the ability to give the developers what they need, whether it's in forms of autonomy on the front end, visibility into their application services and production on the back end, or feedback in the middle. And then, the last thing we touched on was the fact that with this expansion of developers, and so for some time now, there's a stratification, if you will. There's a differentiation of different developer types. And so in the context of autonomy and feedback and visibility, when we talk about a self-service capability, we're talking about different levels of standardization or abstraction that we would need to be able to provide to those developers. So that being said, if you go to the next slide, Lisa. So call to action. So, you remember my colleague Laura from the solution provider company that I kind of highlighted when we started our discussion today. Just stepping back on Laura, she was steeped. She was steeped in agile service management, and so with the combination of her background and her perspective and her skill set, she was able to kind of balance this 30,000 foot view, with an eye for detail, and she was able to bridge the dialogue across these different teams. And so I guess kind of the call to action for the audience here, and I recognize we probably have a range of folks represented on the call, and I'm sure there's a healthy representation from service management professionals and service management leads. So I guess in terms of a call to action, in the journey, in your journey, where's going to be the I guess how can you help your company achieve this idea of software innovation? Because more and more, as Mark Andreessen said, more and more companies are software companies. So if you're not already doing this, and I trust there's some on the call that are heading down this path already based upon the initial poll results. But if you're not already doing this, how can you help your company achieve accelerated software innovation, through this idea of safely empowering developers, expanding developer ranks? So then kind of the question mark there is, so within this journey, as you have the opportunity to move forward, where are you going to find the biggest opportunity for impact? Where's the opportunity to impact empowering key developers around key software and key applications? Where are going to be those key initial opportunities, kind of that low-hanging fruit, or I guess you could say kind of the biggest bang for the buck in terms of establishing a broader, kind of more modern self-service capability. So then, the takeaway there is in terms of a free self-assessment guide. And so Karen's going to run a poll here momentarily, but a free self-assessment guide is available upon request, and it's a tool that can help you identify your best place to start modernizing your processes with self-service access. So I know we skipped over a poll, Karen, so maybe just if you can skip over poll number 2 or poll number 4 and just go straight to poll number 5, then we can let people respond.
I can.
Super, thanks.
Okay, so make your selection. Yeah, I launched the poll, and so make your selection if, a lot of people want that poll. I mean, a lot of people want that guide, so great, perfect. Thank you for offering that for us, Nick.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
And guys, it's Lisa. I'm just jumping in because we're running tight on time, and we have some questions for you, Nick. So while the poll's up, everyone who has questions, Nick's promised to stay around as long as we need them. So feel free to get those questions in. We'll get them all answered as we can. And also, I'm going to throw a link into the chat for you guys. But Simplify and ITSM Academy have worked together to partner and package up some self-service assessments and a training program together, which we really think will help modernize, do all of the things that we've now learned. And Nick, we didn't even get to talk about the 2018 State of DevOps report and how important self-service is. But I mean, I know I've learned a lot today. Hopefully everyone else has as well. This is one of those concepts that I thought I knew more about it coming in than I was actually correct about. So I've really enjoyed this. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And Karen, if you want to just close out that poll and we'll start on the questions.
I will. So we get 83% of you would like to have that. So outstanding. That's great. Okay, and just before we start with the Q&A, I just wanted to let people know, for people that need to drop off, to remind you that the next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, November 15th. And Sean Mack, who is the CEO of XOps, is going to join us. And his presentation is titled Innovate ITIL with DevOps. And Sean says there is a prevalent myth that DevOps and IT service management and ITIL are incompatible. There's actually wide synergy between ITIL and DevOps. And if we understand ITIL as a process framework, and see DevOps as primarily a culture of collaboration, there's no reason we cannot have a process framework integrate very well with a culture of collaboration. Sean says his talk looks at the overlap of ITIL and DevOps and outlines some practical ways in which the DevOps philosophy can be applied to ITIL and operations process management. So I hope you can join us for that, and that would be great.